In 1970, the median home in America cost $17,000. The average worker made $9,400 a year. That house cost 1.8 times their annual income. Today, the median home costs $420,000. The average worker makes $59,000. That same house now costs 7.1 times their annual income. In other words, homes have become 4 times harder to afford in just 50 years. But here's what should terrify you. It's not just about the math. It's about what that math represents. A complete transformation of the American economy that happened so gradually most people didn't even notice they were being robbed. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Here's a photograph from 1972. A young couple stands in front of a modest 2-story home with white aluminum siding in Toledo, Ohio. The man wears bell-bottom jeans, his arm around his wife who holds their newborn baby. Behind them sits a brand new Ford station wagon, chrome bumper gleaming in the sun. His name is Michael Patterson. He's 24 years old and works as a machinist at the Jeep plant. She stays home with their daughter. They just bought this 3-bedroom house for $28,000. Michael makes $12,000 a year. Their mortgage payment is $186 per month. That's 19% of his income. Now look at this photo from 2024. A young couple in Boise, Idaho, standing in front of an almost identical house. He's 26, works as a machinist. She's a registered nurse. This house cost them $450,000. Together they make $110,000 a year. Their mortgage payment is $2,698 per month. That's 29% of their combined income. One income in 1972, 2 incomes today, both with college degrees, and they're still stretched thinner than Michael ever was. What the hell happened? The answer is simple, but nobody wants to say it out loud. You were systematically robbed over 5 decades by people who rewrote the rules of the economy in their favor while convincing you it was all natural and inevitable. Let me show you exactly how they did it. First, understand what we lost. Between 1945 and 1973, something remarkable happened in America. The economy grew at nearly 4% every year, and that growth was shared relatively equally. When productivity increased, wages increased. When companies made more profit, workers got raises. The bottom 20% of earners saw their incomes grow at almost the same rate as the top 20%. Everyone's boat was rising together. Let me walk you through what that actually looked like in real life. Meet Robert Williams in 1965. He works at the General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan. Every morning he wakes up at 5:30 in his 3-bedroom ranch house that he bought 5 years ago for $18,000 on his single income of $7,000 per year. He showers, eats breakfast with his wife Dorothy, then drives his 2-year-old Chevrolet Impala to the factory. That car cost $2,800 brand new. He paid cash. At the plant, Robert clocks in at exactly 7 a.m. His job is repetitive, but it pays $3.25 per hour. With overtime, he'll make about $15,000 this year in today's money. But here's what matters more than the wage. Robert is in the union. The United Auto Workers negotiated his contract. That means full health care for his entire family with no deductible. A pension that will pay 70% of his salary for life after 30 years. 2 weeks paid vacation. Job security that makes it almost impossible to get fired without serious cause. When his shift ends at 3:30, Robert stops at the credit union inside the plant to deposit his paycheck. The credit union pays 5% interest on savings and offers cheap loans for cars and houses. He drives home through downtown Flint, which is absolutely thriving. Department stores, movie theaters, restaurants, all packed with people. The tax base is strong because GM pays substantial property taxes, and its workers earn enough to support local businesses. At home, Dorothy has pot roast and mashed potatoes ready. After dinner, Robert plays with his 3 kids in the backyard. His oldest son, Michael, is starting at the University of Michigan next year. Tuition is $400 per semester. Robert has already saved enough to pay for all 4 years. No loans needed. Before bed, Robert and Dorothy sit at their kitchen table going over finances. They're putting away $300 every month, about 20% of his take-home pay. In 5 years, they'll have enough saved to buy a cottage on Lake Huron. They'll pay cash for that too. This was normal. This was reality for millions of American workers. A factory job with a high school education could buy you a house, raise a family, send kids to college, and retire comfortably, all on one income. Now let me show you what happened to Robert's grandson, also named Robert Williams. He's 28 years old in 2024 and works at that same GM plant in Flint, except now the plant employs maybe 1/5 of the workers it used to. Most of the buildings are abandoned, windows smashed out, weeds growing through the concrete. Young Robert wakes up at 5:30 in his 1-bedroom apartment because he can't afford to buy a house, even in Flint where homes are dirt cheap compared to the rest of America. He's got $45,000 in student loan debt from getting an associate's degree in manufacturing technology. That degree was required just to be considered for his grandfather's job. He drives a 10-year-old Honda with 160,000 miles that he bought for $8,000 financed at 12% because his credit score is mediocre. At work, Robert makes $28 per hour. That's about $58,000 a year, roughly the same as his grandfather earned adjusted for inflation. But everything else is completely different. Robert is not in the union. GM successfully broke the union's power and created a two-tier wage system. Workers hired after 2007 get significantly lower pay and worse benefits. His health insurance has a $3,000 deductible and only covers 60% of costs after that. No pension, just a 401k that GM barely contributes to. 1 week of vacation instead of 2. 0 job security. He's watched dozens of co-workers get laid off with 2 weeks' notice. His paycheck goes into a regular bank account that pays 0.01% interest and charges him $12 a month in fees if his balance drops below $500, which it often does. Let's add up young Robert's monthly expenses. Rent is $1,000. Student loans are $380. Car payment is $250. Car insurance is $160. Health insurance, even with GM subsidizing some of it, costs $200 per month. Phone bill is $80. Groceries for one person run about $400. That's $2,390 in fixed expenses on a take-home pay of roughly $3,000 after taxes. He's got $610 left for gas, car maintenance, clothes, any entertainment, emergencies, and supposedly saving for a house down payment. He saves nothing. He can't. One unexpected expense, and he's borrowing money or using credit cards at 24% interest. Downtown Flint, where his grandfather shopped and ate, it's a wasteland. Boarded up buildings, empty lots. The only restaurants are fast food chains. Schools are falling apart. The tax base collapsed when GM downsized and the good-paying jobs disappeared. 2 men, same city, same plant, same job title. Completely different universes. So, what changed between 1973 and now? Everything. And it wasn't an accident. Around 1973, something fundamental broke in the American economy. If you plot productivity against wages on a graph, you see the exact moment it happened. From 1948 to 1973, productivity increased 97% and hourly compensation increased 91%. The lines moved together almost parallel. Workers shared in the prosperity they created. From 1973 to today, productivity increased 78%, but hourly compensation only increased 12%. The lines diverged dramatically. Workers kept getting more productive, but they stopped benefiting from their own increased output. Someone else was capturing those gains. Who? Where did the money go? Corporate profits doubled as a share of GDP. In 1965, corporate profits were about 6% of GDP. Today, they're over 12%. Executive pay exploded from 20 times the average worker in 1965 to over 300 times today. But it goes deeper than greedy executives. The entire structure of the economy was deliberately redesigned to shift power away from workers and toward owners. The destruction of unions was systematic and intentional. In 1955, 35% of American workers were union members. Today, it's 10% overall and only 6% in the private sector. This collapse is the single biggest factor in wage stagnation. An individual worker negotiating with General Motors has zero leverage. Take the wage offered or they'll hire someone else. But when 20,000 workers negotiate collectively through a union, suddenly the leverage shifts. The company can't easily replace 20,000 workers. The union can strike, shut down production, cost the company millions per day. That leverage let unions capture a fair share of the value workers created. Corporations spent the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds systematically destroying that leverage. They hired union-busting consultants, relocated factories to states with weak labor laws, outsourced production to countries where unions were illegal and workers earned dollars per day. The government helped. The National Labor Relations Board that's supposed to protect workers' right to organize became increasingly pro-business. Penalties for illegally firing workers trying to unionize became trivial, just a cost of doing business. Presidents from both parties supported trade deals making it easy to move production overseas, using that threat to extract concessions from American workers. By the 1,990 seconds, just threatening to unionize would make companies shut down entire facilities. When Walmart workers in Texas tried forming a union, the company closed the store. When Boeing workers in Washington demanded better contracts, Boeing moved production to South Carolina. Workers learned that asking for more would result in their job disappearing entirely. Collective action became suicidal. This fear created a race to the bottom where companies competed by cutting labor costs rather than improving products or innovation. At the same time, the entire philosophy of American capitalism changed. In 1970, economist Milton Friedman published an essay arguing the only responsibility of business is increasing shareholder profits. This idea replaced the previous model where companies balanced interests of workers, customers, communities, and owners. Shareholder primacy coincided with changes giving shareholders more power. Hostile takeovers became common. Corporate raiders would buy companies, slash costs, especially labor, and sell assets for quick profits. Workers and communities were collateral damage. To defend against raiders, companies had to maximize short-term stock prices. That meant cutting costs ruthlessly, especially the biggest cost, which is labor. Executive compensation was restructured around stock options that only paid off if stock prices rose. This aligned CEO interests with shareholders but divorced them from workers and long-term company health. Why invest in worker training that pays off in 10 years when you can buy back stock and boost the price this quarter? The housing market transformed from shelter into investment vehicle. In 1970, the median house cost 2.2 times median household income. By 2024, it's 5.8 times median income. Houses became unaffordable not because of construction costs, but because of deliberate policy choices. Zoning laws became incredibly restrictive. Single-family zoning now covers the vast majority of urban land, creating artificial scarcity. When population grows but new construction is blocked by zoning, prices skyrocket. Cities enacted these restrictions partly due to racism and partly because existing homeowners wanted to protect their property values. Once you own a home, you have financial incentive to restrict supply and drive prices up. Wealthy individuals and corporations started buying houses not to live in, but to rent out or resell at profit. Private equity firms now own hundreds of thousands of single-family homes, bidding up prices and converting ownership housing into rental housing. Foreign investors park money in U.S. real estate, often leaving properties vacant. Education costs exploded as states slashed funding. In 1965, the University of Michigan charged $390 per year. By 2024, it's over $16,000 for in-state students. State funding per student was cut by more than 50%. Why? Tax cuts. Starting in the 1,980 seconds, states competed to lower taxes, especially on corporations and the wealthy. Lost revenue had to come from somewhere, and education was an easy target because students don't vote much and can borrow to cover the difference. The result is young workers starting careers with massive debt that previous generations never faced. This debt delays home purchases and starting families. It transfers wealth from young workers to older lenders. Young Robert needed that associate's degree to get his grandfather's job. Same work. But he paid $45,000 for the privilege of being considered. Healthcare costs exploded from 5% of GDP in 1965 to 18% today. Americans spend twice as much per person as any other developed country, with worse health outcomes. The key shift was moving costs from employers and government to individuals. In 1965, 70% of healthcare costs were paid by employers and government. Today, individuals pay nearly 50% through premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket costs. Young Robert pays thousands per year for healthcare his grandfather received free as part of his employment package. Taxes on the wealthy and corporations plummeted while taxes on workers stayed high or increased. In 1965, the top income tax rate was 70%. Corporate tax rate was 48%. Today, the top rate is 37% and corporate rate is 21%. The theory was these cuts would stimulate growth, benefiting everyone. Trickle-down economics. After 40 years, the results are clear. Tax cuts for the wealthy don't trickle down. They pool at the top. The tax system shifted burden from wealth to work. Capital gains from investments are taxed lower than wages. Meanwhile, payroll taxes that fund Social Security and Medicare increased. Workers pay 7.65% on every dollar earned. These taxes cap at a certain income level, so the wealthy pay a much smaller percentage of total income. None of this was accidental. These weren't natural market outcomes. They were policy choices made by politicians, business leaders, and economists who decided labor needed to be disciplined, unions needed to be broken, shareholders mattered more than workers. These choices were justified with economic theories claiming everyone would benefit. Cut taxes on the wealthy and they'll invest and create jobs. Bust unions and companies will be more competitive. Deregulate finance and capital will flow efficiently. But every prediction was wrong. The wealthy didn't invest. They bought back stock and parked money offshore. Companies didn't become more competitive. They became focused on short-term stock prices. Deregulated finance didn't allocate capital efficiently. It created bubbles and crashes. Yet the policies continued because they benefited the powerful. The people making decisions were insulated from consequences. They got richer while everyone else got poorer. Old Robert retired at 58 with a full pension. He and Dorothy sold their house for a nice profit and bought that cottage on Lake Huron. They live comfortably on his pension and Social Security, helping their grandchildren when they can. Young Robert will work until 70, assuming he can find employment. He has no pension, just a 401k with $17,000 at age 28. At current rates, he'll retire with maybe $400,000. That sounds like a lot until you realize he might live 30 years in retirement and healthcare alone could consume most of it. He'll probably never own a home. He'll probably never feel financially secure. The American dream his grandfather took for granted, stable employment, home ownership, comfortable retirement, has been replaced by permanent economic anxiety. And young Robert is relatively lucky. He has a manufacturing job paying reasonably well. Millions of Americans work retail, service, or gig jobs, paying even less with no benefits at all. This is what changed between those two photographs. Not just inflation or technology or globalization. What changed was a systematic restructuring of economic power. Workers lost power, owners gained it, and every institution that could have checked this transfer was weakened or captured. The uncomfortable truth is post-war prosperity wasn't the natural state of capitalism. It was an aberration, created by specific circumstances. Strong unions, high taxes on the wealthy, regulated markets, government investment in public goods. Those circumstances were dismantled systematically over 5 decades. What replaced them isn't free market capitalism. It's a rigged system where the powerful write rules benefiting themselves. You can't buy a house on one income anymore because people who own houses don't want you to. Restrictive zoning protects their investment. You can't afford healthcare because insurance and pharmaceutical companies profit from the current system. You can't save money because wages are suppressed while costs rise. The tragedy is we know how to fix this. We did it before. Strong unions, progressive taxation, public investment in education and healthcare, regulations preventing market concentration, and financial manipulation. These things worked. But fixing it requires taking power from those who currently hold it. It requires acknowledging the economic system isn't neutral or natural, but a set of political choices that can be changed. The first step is seeing clearly what happened. How we went from a society where a machinist could buy a house, raise a family, and retire comfortably on one income, to a society where 2 professional incomes barely suffice. The second step is refusing to accept this as inevitable. It's not. It's a choice, and choices can be changed. Look at those 2 photographs again. The young couple in 1972 and the young couple in 2024. Understand what you're seeing. The greatest transfer of wealth and economic security in American history. The American dream didn't die from natural causes. It was murdered, deliberately, systematically, over decades. And until we name what happened and demand justice, it won't come back. The question is, what are you going to do about it?